What's up, people? I'm here. It's 4 a.m. in the UK. Let me turn the light on a little more. It's 4 a.m. Friday night. Well, Saturday morning now, I guess. My wife will be awake in maybe 2 or 3 hours. This is what my life has been reduced to. It's pretty great, though, I guess. I've been up all night tonight reading, trying to catch up on the first few sections of Nick Land's new book called Cryptocurrent. And I've been trying to make a video about it. I've been wanting to talk about it since I started reading it. And I set out one night last week to do a live stream where I would talk about my first impressions. And when the time came, the time that I scheduled to do it came, I was getting my notes together and I just decided the time wasn't right. I wasn't ready to do it. It's very complicated material. It's very quite dense. And it's really good. I mean, I'm really into it, and that's why I want to do it justice. And so I was like, okay, let's wait. Let's read a little bit more, make some more notes, try to get a handle on this a little bit better before I talk about it. And then, a few days passed, and I tried to stay up. He's releasing different sections of it, I think, on a daily basis now. And so reading more, trying to improve my grasp on where he's going with this book. And I decided that I would try again tonight. And so I was going to do a live stream tonight I was aiming to do it around 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. And I just went back to the texts and trying to, really kind of put my finger on it in a little bit better way. And then I was looking some things up and kind of went down a rabbit hole, but it was a good rabbit hole. I was checking some things specifically about cryptography and about Kant. And then I just went down a really long rabbit hole, but it was good though. I was like really kind of filling out my picture of these different topics, and I think I was really kind of making some progress in trying to grasp where I think Nick is going with it. But the problem is now that it's 4 a.m. and I'm tired, whatever. But I decided, I was going to, before I did this live stream, I was basically kind of thinking I should postpone this because, it's late. My brain's already a little tired, and it's really complicated stuff. I'm not really going to be able to do it justice, so I should wait. But then I'm just like, dude, this is the whole point of live streaming. Like, I don't have to overthink it. I'll just be straight with you. So this is not going to be a kind of fancy lecture or anything like that. It's not going to be a kind of impressive, adequate summary or explanation or explication of what Nick is doing in his new book, at least insofar as the first sections reveal. It's just going to be my impressions, basically. I'm going to give you a little bit of just a tour through my early impressions of it, and I'll try, if I can at different points, to maybe share with you a little bit of clarification knowledge, because the book is very complicated. So I guess I'll just jump right into it then. The book is about Bitcoin and philosophy. The title is Cryptocurrent, and the subtitle, if I recall correctly, I think it is Bitcoin and philosophy. And I would say the very overarching kind of idea of the book is that Bitcoin is a philosophy machine, really. And what I think he's trying to do is he's going to kind of draw out this analogy, and I think he thinks it's more than an analogy, between Bitcoin and the the kind of nature of the modern philosophical project, linked especially to Kant and Kant's kind of transcendental method. So I think by doing that, his goal is that if he's right, then he'll be able to cash out that analogy into a bunch of pretty far-reaching implications or conclusions regarding philosophical questions. And so, that's a very, very simple way to summarize what I think the idea behind the book is. And but it is extremely cryptic, and he makes some references to the cryptic nature of the book about cryptocurrency. These lights are, let me, there, that's a little better. He makes some references to the cryptic nature of his writing, and there's definitely some method to that. There's a reason why it's especially cryptic. I think it's one of the first few aphorisms, because it's written in short sections. It's one of the first few little sections where he asks the question, does he really need to be so cryptic? And he answers in the affirmative. There are also some comments later in the first sections about how there is a kind of cryptic liberal tradition, which is quite fascinating. So he evokes this kind of idea of a kind of long-running cryptic tradition, and I think he obviously kind of locates himself in that tradition. So I need to also sketch for you that he's releasing the book in a serial fashion. So he's posting it to his blog. I put a link in the description below. He's releasing it in short sections, and I think there's only been about 15 so far. So everything I'm saying right now is basically me just giving you my impressions of where it looks like it's going, what he seems to be saying. And while the book is cryptic, it's very dense and kind of difficult to understand, I think, for a lot of people. To his credit, the first sections are actually quite... He front loads the book. He basically says that he's going to kind of tell you up front some of the basic implications and basic ideas that the rest of the book is going to try to demonstrate. So that's actually that's relatively transparent. I think you can get a pretty good grasp of the overall picture that he's trying to paint and where he's going to go with it. But I have to give the caveat that everything I'm saying is just kind of speculating from the tea leaves that he's dropped for us so far. So yeah, Bitcoin is a philosophical machine, and specifically for Nick, what philosophy means for him is modern philosophy, what modern philosophy means for him is the Kantian or kind of transcendental method, if you will. And so I guess maybe for people who don't know anything about philosophy or cryptography, I could maybe give you a few very brief pointers or kind of pieces of background knowledge that you might need or want to have to be able to parse Nick's book. I should give you the caveat that I'm not an expert on Kant. I've never pretended to be. I'm certainly not an expert on cryptography. Never pretended to be. But I have read about these things and studied these things in earlier parts of my life enough that I could probably just impart to people who are way more clueless than me some of the basic insights or principles that you might need to know. It's not too complicated. I mean, Nick is not going into really kind of like deep intricacies of the Kantian system. And certainly you don't need to know that much about all of the arcane debates between whatever, Kant and Leibniz and Newton or whatever. But you definitely will need to know at least some of the key ideas, I think, of kind of the Kantian philosophical perspective. And then you'll also need to know some key ideas about cryptography, I think, because he doesn't really take any time to explain these things. As I said, he has a fairly cryptic kind of writing style, which I think he's self-conscious about. I haven't really fully parsed why exactly. Someone else might be able to speak to that better, but hopefully it'll become clear, and I'll share that with you as I figure it out. But right, so where was I? Yeah, with that as a caveat that I'm no con expert and I'm no cryptography expert, and we've only got to read the first few sections of the book, I'm going to now pontificate on some of my personal reflections, thoughts, impressions, and yeah, I mean, I actually have been taking notes because I don't know that much. I'm very, very rusty on my Kant and cryptography and stuff like that. So, but the book is real. I mean, one thing I'll say real quick is it's definitely really exciting. The book is really exciting. It's really, really cool. And, if he delivers even halfway on the promises that he's kind of already laid out in the first sections, I think it's pretty clear that it's going to be quite a event, this book. And so, yeah, it's motivating me to actually want to take the time and energy to try to really parse out what he's getting at and what he's saying. So to do that, it's forced me to kind of go back to the books a little bit and brush up on my Kant and brush up on cryptography and stuff like that. So yeah, I figured what I could do for this live stream, since I'll probably never be quite like happy with my grasp of what he's trying to say or do until the book is over or fully written, perhaps, and maybe even not then. I figure on this live stream I can just basically work out my impressions as we go. And with all of those caveats, I hopefully have not, I hopefully will not be over-promising anything here. So yeah, if you're interested in my random reflections and maybe some background pieces of knowledge or information that might help you read this book or understand it, or you're just curious what I think, then I'm happy to have you. Stick around. I'll talk for maybe like an hour or something like that. You can ask questions if you want. I'm looking at the chat, but also I'll say that if I'm like trying to get out a thought that's kind of complicated, I'll be systematically kind of ignoring the chat. So, but feel free to ask questions or what you will. So, right. Then one thing, for instance, you constantly find even throughout these early sections of the book is he draws a bunch of kind of equivalencies between certain categories or concepts in the Kantian philosophy and in Bitcoin and cryptography. So yeah, obviously if you don't know anything about those two areas of work, then you're going to be really confused. So I had to kind of go back over some of these things, so I'll share some with you. So for instance, like, he talks a lot about fairly arcane kind of cryptographic concepts, such as like trapdoor functions, for instance, or he talks about asymmetric cryptography. These are, there are technical terms like this that you see kind of peppered throughout the text so far. And if you're not an expert, those things might not be immediately obvious to you. So for instance, I was trying to figure out exactly what he means by asymmetric cryptography and why is that so important. Like as opposed to symmetric cryptography. I had no idea. I don't know what these things are. And he doesn't like really explain. So for instance, basically asymmetric cryptography refers to public key cryptography. And really the only or the main distinction between symmetric and asymmetric cryptography is that symmetric cryptography means that both parties have the same key, basically, whereas public key cryptography, there's a public key where anyone who has that public key and that key is made public, anyone can have it. It's publicly distributed. You need that public key to send a message, but to decode the message, there's a private key. So that's what's asymmetric about it. So symmetric, think both parties have the same key, it's symmetric, and then asymmetric refers to the public private nature of public key cryptography. It's asymmetric because anyone can send into it. So a very large number of people can possibly send into it, but only one person can unlock it, basically, or one designated set of entities who have that private key. So when he refers to asymmetric cryptography or public key cryptography, he's referring to the same things. And the reason why I think that's so important, and why he's not just talking about cryptography as such, but public key or asymmetric cryptography, is because this is going to really matter for, I think, the way that he's going to cash out the socio-political implications, because it essentially has to do with the public versus the private sphere. And so that's going to be part of it. I think another part of it is he also invokes this concept of trapdoor functions. And again, if you aren't up on this stuff, you're not going to know what that is. A trapdoor function is actually quite simple. The concept is quite simple. Yeah, Crypt says asymmetric, symmetric has other important distinctions. I'm sure that's true. So if anyone wants to type those in, that might be helpful to people, and to me even too. The trapdoor functions are actually fairly simple idea. Obviously, they can become quite complex and put into a complex operations. But the basic idea is quite simple. The idea is a trapdoor function is, if I recall correctly, it's any function that's basically easy to solve one way but difficult to solve the other way. So a kind of textbook example, a toy example, is take any random number with a lot of digits, like 800 million, followed by like 653,762, whatever. Just imagine a string of like whatever 9 numbers or something like that. And I were to say to you, what 2 numbers did I use to equal this number? You would not be able to figure that out, would you? But if I gave you those 2 numbers that multiplied, produced that big string of numbers, that bigger number, it's trivially easy to calculate that bigger number from those 2 small numbers, right? So that's basically a trapdoor function, something that's easy to figure out one way, but hard to figure out another way. And so that's basically the asymmetry of public key cryptography. So, in the textbooks that you read, there you often find that the example of a lockbox or a padlock is actually a really good example for just like a simple kind of visual metaphor that's straightforward. So like a padlock, when you buy a padlock, it's opened up, right? It's trivially easy to lock it into place, right? But then it's getting it out. That's the hard part, right? So padlocks are trapdoor functions, or lock boxes, like a PO box or something like that, like a mailbox that's locked. Anyone can put something into it. Anyone can drop a letter into it or something like that, but only one person has the key and only they can open it. That's another kind of model of trapdoor function. So Crypt here says that in asymmetric cryptography, it is possible to send a message to a public key owner. Only they can read, and similarly, it is possible for the public key only to produce a message only they could have possibly produced, validating the fact that it was them. Okay, that's interesting. And so, so these are just some examples of concepts that you'll see kind of tossed around in the book that aren't necessarily obvious. And so why do these things matter? Well, again, we can only kind of speculate at this stage, also because I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it. But I think that one of the key ideas that's going to be kind of really useful maybe for unifying a lot of these different concepts is this all has something to do with entropy. And I don't want to go on some kind of like crazy tangent where I pretend to be like more sophisticated as a kind of physicist than I am or anything like that. But it seems to me that entropy is kind of useful because Nick is trying to build this kind of philosophical system that translates different disciplines, if you will, into some kind of like unified model in some sense, because, you know, he talks about currents and he says pretty explicitly that he's talking about, you know, you can think about it as electrical currents. Like he even has in the book, like the formula for electrical currents. And he's drawing this equivalence between, or analogy at least, between electrical currents and time itself, time as a current, right? Like we think of current affairs, right? And also currency in terms of money, right? So electrical current, time current, and money currency. Those are all three components of the current in the title of cryptocurrent. And so you can kind of be constantly translating these different vocabularies into each other, or you know, you can try to think about some kind of more unified conceptual substrate. And it seems to me like entropy is one of them. So for instance, I'll tell you why I'm thinking that. It's because time, what defines the movement of time, what defines the arrow of time, is its irreversibility, basically. And irreversibility comes up in the book a lot already. And irreversibility has a pretty fairly kind of simple way. There's a fairly simple way to understand that in terms of entropy. So like if I break a glass on the floor, right, it's much harder to get all those broken pieces back up into the format of the single glass, right? It's really that like that's a more chaotic situation. All those broken glass shards on the floor is a much more kind of chaotic, random situation, right, than a properly formed glass, right? So a properly formed glass can be thought of as this kind of negentropic structure. It's order, right? And when it smashes, that's chaos. And so the arrow of time is basically refers to the fact that once that glass is smashed, you know, for all intents and purposes, you're never going to get that smashed set of glass particles back into the format of the you know, properly constituted glass. And it's that irreversibility that is in some sense the definition of the movement of time. Like think about it this way: if we didn't have that irreversibility, if it was just as easy to get those shards of glass back into the format of a perfectly constituted glass, in some sense, then the time would be reversible, right? And if it's reversible, then it's not time in some sense. So, okay, so that's a bit of an aside, but I think something very similar is at work in this idea of the trapdoor function, right? It's like when you drop that letter into the public mailbox that's locked up and only one other person has the key. When you drop that letter in, you know, it's easy to put the letter in. It's hard to get the letter out, right? So it seems to be that seems to be a very similar type of situation as to the broken glass. And my sense is that, right, my sense is that you're going to see that type of structure kind of recur throughout, you know, the different parts of his argument. So, okay, that's just a bit of an aside, I guess. Crypt also adds that another common term you'll hear is one-way hash, which is a kind of trapdoor. It can only go one direction. Every input will produce a unique output, which can't be reversed into the input. Okay, that's really useful to know. I didn't know exactly what one-way hash means. So that's really useful. Thank you. So, okay, what else? You know, you'll hear lots of references to the Kantian philosophy. So, for instance, whenever he's talking about synthetic or analytic, or he's talking about critique, these are all words that are implicitly references to basically Kant and critical philosophy. So I guess I'll just give everyone a really quick and dirty little recap on Kantian on these basic Kantian categories. So synthetic knowledge basically refers to, I mean, I'm going to be very simplistic here. If you're a Kant scholar, you'll probably dislike this, but basically synthetic refers to kind of contingent empirical facts, and analytic refers to basically tautological forms of knowledge. Think like logic, basically. So any statement that is kind of fully self-contained, it's like it's a tautology, really, is synthetic. Or forms of knowing that are self-contained, like, all unmarried men are bachelors. That's analytic. It's basically a tautology, just defining the relations between terms. It hardly has any reference to anything in the world. One is basically contained in the other. And synthetic, though, refers to basically contingent facts. So, like, this unmarried man is rich. Not all unmarried men are rich. It's not necessarily contained in the fact of being unmarried. So unmarried men can be rich or they can be poor. So if you have an unmarried man who is rich, that's synthetic. Different pieces of information are being combined, right? So that's the basic distinction between analytic and synthetic. And then, but the really key idea is synthetic a priori. So basically, the puzzle here in kind of the philosophical tradition is, how is it possible to have knowledge which we construct as humans, but it also seems to be necessarily true? So a kind of classic example here would be, basically think of scientific laws, or, I think for Kant, even arithmetic or like geometry, if I recall correctly. That's synthetic a priori. That's synthetic a priori knowledge. So it has to be constructed, synthetic, but it's also necessarily true. So for instance, like, what is 5 plus, the statement that 5 plus 7 equals 12, that is, I mean, by the way, there are major debates about this. Like, is that actually synthetic? Is that a priori? That's a whole debate. But just for the simple purposes of explicating these basic ideas for people who are totally clueless, the idea is that to get the number 12, to figure out what that number 12 is, you have to kind of look at the 5, then look at the 7, piece them together, and then you kind of get the 12. So, but, although that's synthetic, it's a kind of empirical discovery process, it's also necessarily true, So if you have 12 and you take away 7, there can't be anything other than 5. So it's absolutely a priori, and yet, you had to kind of construct it by engaging with contingent empirical information. And so, okay, so why is that so important? Well, one other last point about the Kantian philosophy you need to be aware of. So Nick refers a lot to kind of critical philosophy or critique. And he means this in a very kind of I think specific Kantian way. He more or less says that, I think. And for those of you who've never read Kant, what that basically means is Kant is sort of known for a very particular, specific type of operation. And in a nutshell, it's basically, some philosophers might want to ask, like, how do we know that my hand is right here, whatever, pick your favorite stupid example. How can we know that something is true? How do we know that my hand is right here? How do we know this microphone is silver, whatever? And the critical method is basically, instead of asking that question, you ask, what are the conditions for the possibility of knowing such and such? And so it's just basically a different way of posing questions of knowledge. And I think one of the things that is important about it is that it turns the kind of philosophical scalpel in on the philosopher. So this, I think, is what Nick means when he's kind of constantly writing about kind of circuits and the circular nature of philosophy and auto critique and the auto production of philosophy. When you see words like auto dash something, there are these like you constantly see in the book so far already a lot of references to this kind of critical nature. And so I'm just trying to explicate for you what Nick means by critical or philosophical in the modern sense. It's this turning of philosophy upon itself and asking about the conditions for the possibility of something. And so, right, Nick seems to think that this kind of Kantian, this critical Kantian philosophy, this critical mode of philosophy questioning itself, basically, is the kind of essential horizon of all modern philosophy, and that there's really no way, there's no way out of that or no way around that. He seems to think that there is a kind of deep homology, if you will, or isomorphism, if you will, between capital and modernity and modern critical philosophy in its Kantian sense. Okay, and so, right, those were just some really simple, quick and dirty, kind of cartoon version clarifications of some of the ideas that he kind of refers to without really explaining them. What else do we have? Right, and so already we can kind of start to see the connections between the modern tradition of philosophy and Bitcoin, because he says things in there like how the analytic synthetic distinction gets kind of realized as public key cryptography. He says that at some point quite emphatically. To be frank, I haven't quite worked out exactly what he means by that, but these are the types of analogies that you'll start to see. So I think what he means by that, well, yeah, I'm just going to say I don't know. That's one of the many things I'm going to flag that I'm kind of trying to figure out. So, right, what else? Something else you see is that he writes a lot already about this idea that critique is a circuit, as I was saying before, that because philosophy is basically the criticism of itself. And also, modern philosophy is basically the critique of trusted authorities, right? And so Bitcoin is pretty explicitly about how to develop a currency that doesn't rely on trusted authorities. So it's an obvious kind of commonality. I think that's, quite intuitive. But there's some interesting stuff in here about how, because philosophy is, criticism of itself, it has this kind of circular or circuitous structure. And then he introduces this term diagonal. He likes to talk about diagonal method and diagonal argument. And I'm also not fully sure what he means by that, but I've been thinking about it, and I guess I have some ideas. So, well, one thing he says is that in a kind of in the circuit model or critical model, there's no kind of resolution. There's just, he says at one point, it's either a kind of constant dynamic search for equilibrium. So I guess in that model, you imagine kind of like forces flowing around kind of the circular circuit, perhaps with fluctuation, but kind of in a constant process of leveling out. Or you think of, he talks about, I think, excitation. And so that, I think he's kind of referring to, the model of positive feedback. So, a force goes from one side to the other, increasing, and then to the other, increasing it, and then to the other, increasing it, and so on. And so it's circular, but also kind of escalating. And so, right. So it's not a matter of like some question being like resolved. It's a matter of uh, these flows of forces. So the reason I'm talking about this is because, um, basically everything he says in a kind of philosophical register should have some sort of complement in kind of the technical machine of Bitcoin. And then it's at the end of this kind of first batch of sections that he's released where he, I think, kind of comes through with that on this point, um, in which he talks about how, kind of the value of Bitcoin is bootstrapped basically from its own technology. So basically, the entire history of money has a major kind of security problem, right? Because everyone in the history of money wants to kind of counterfeit money and do these different types of manipulations to basically kind of steal value. And so he talks about how Bitcoin, by kind of discovering how to solve the double spending problem, and then by actually building a system that gamifies it, by instantiating that technical machine, by creating a system that can do that, that is actually part of what makes the Bitcoin currency valuable, because of its kind of built-in, kind of bootstrapped, gamified security value. And so I think that's, cryptocurrency has this kind of circular structure. In other words, that's somewhat homologous to kind of the operation of critical philosophy. And right, so that's just a bit of an observation or comment there. What else do I have? Oh, so probably my favorite bits. Yeah, I don't know if he's referring to Cantor. I think he might. I think it might be Cantor. I did a little bit of searching on diagonal argument, and it wasn't conclusive. But I did see some stuff about Cantor. So if anyone knows more about Cantor, I would love to hear an effective elucidation of what diagonal argument, like where exactly is that coming from? What is he drawing on? He explains it, but like, all the stuff he explains, he just explains one concept with like other cryptic concepts. And, it's kind of interesting. It's certainly interesting and exciting, but it's, one is quite hard pressed sometimes to know what exactly he's trying to say. The parts of the book so far that I thought was most exciting was basically his riffs on duplicity. So this is where I think it gets really cool. And I think this is where you also kind of see the larger philosophical stakes. I mean, it's very clear to me that he's going to try to cash in these insights for like major kind of world historical implications. So basically he talks about like what's at stake really is the how should I put this? The kind of engineering and then the reverse engineering of duplicity. And so it's like, the way that I think about this is that if you think about the traditional philosophy as basically trying to hunt out lies and errors and mistakes and authorities that foist upon people false ideas and notions that serve the interests of those authorities, then philosophy is constantly trying to identify and attack all of these forms of duplicity. I believe that Nick Land sees Bitcoin as basically solving the problem of duplicity, because for Nick, the double spending problem, which again, that's just a kind of key idea that you have to understand, which is, it's really quite simple, that one. It's just that with any, with any currency. If you can spend it twice, you got a real problem, right? But it's especially bad with cryptocurrency because, if you have a crypto, whatever, one crypto coin, if you want to think of it as a coin, all that is it exists on a file, right, on a computer. And we all know precisely what's good about files is you can copy them quickly and easily for zero marginal cost. So this is the major problem why we've never really had digital currencies until now, because it's just too easy to basically make potentially infinite counterfeits of any digital currency. It's much easier to counterfeit a digital currency than it is paper currency even. And so because of that, that's the double spending problem, basically. Crypt says it tries to answer the question of how you prove when something happened. Right. I'm not sure what yeah, that's true. I'm not sure what part of the conversation you're referring to there, though. Justin would absolutely BTFO philosophy tube in a debate. What is BTFO again? Oh, beat the F out of. I've never heard of philosophy tube or watched that. I'll check it out though. Right. Crypt says it tries to answer the question of how you prove when something happened without being told. Yes. Synthetic time. Double spending. Right. That's right. Yeah, that's all right. So that's basically where I'm going with this. Basically, right. So I just basically explicated the double spending problem, which that is fairly quite simple to understand, I think. No one has to back off. It's cool. It's all good. I appreciate comments. And I see. You're clarifying what BTFO means. Thanks. So, right. So that's the double spending problem. And basically what Nick is saying, what Nick thinks is that in Satoshi Nakamoto's solution to the double spending problem, I think Nick believes that represents a kind of breakthrough landmark moment in which the nature of duplicity itself and its kind of like rawest, most general technical form, kind of the raw technical nature of duplicity itself has been kind of hacked. It's been cracked. The code has been cracked of how duplicity can be prevented. Basically, in the solution of the double spending problem, the problem of duplicity in general has been solved. There's something like that Nick, I think, believes, and that I think has some of the most exciting implications, because Nick talks about how so much of life as we know it, like organic systems that have been on Earth for millions of years, are basically kind of characterized by different forms of duplicity. And he talks about like the virus, for instance. Like a virus is basically a hijacking of code, and so like all of life as we know it kind of involves constant misrepresentation, and it's actually like it's a fundamental kind of primordial mechanism of life itself, duplicity. And it also obviously leads to major problems in kind of modern social political conflicts, like misrepresentation and lying of all different kinds. And so I think one of the big implications I'm kind of hoping to see in the book. I'm hoping to see drawn out in the book, and I think this is the vibe that I get. This is just the impression I get from the first few sections that Nick has dropped, is that basically the Bitcoin white paper is basically a kind of breakthrough world historical solving of the problem of duplicity in general. I forget. There were some other implications of that I maybe wanted to talk about, but maybe I'll pick that up later. And here, so Crypt says, because in the case of double spending, you have to prove the order of transactions so that you can't buy a coffee from A and from B. Yes, that's right. Right. And so that's right. This idea of synthetic time, for instance, I was trying to figure out like what exactly Nick meant by synthetic time. And I think I kind of figured it out. Like basically, so the way you stop the double spending problem is you just need a reliable way of determining which of two events, which of two possible spending events happened first. And if you can determine which one happened first, then the second one just gets excluded. It doesn't count. It's invalid. And so the blockchain is basically a way of doing that. For those of you who, maybe for those of you who don't know, really quick and dirty kind of summary of it's a distributed ledger, right? So a bunch of people have on their computer a copy of what is basically the whole history of transactions. And so if I try to do double spending, for instance, I could try to send, a Bitcoin to person A and to person B at exactly the same time. I could try to do that, right? What the Bitcoin idea is that's so important is it's basically just a protocol for, in a decentralized way, identifying which one of those was made first and then not allowing the second one to enter onto the ledger, basically. And I mean, we could maybe go into that in more technical detail, but I'm certainly not prepared to do that at the moment. And I think that basically conveys the basic idea of it. So this is like the radical solving of the double spending problem for digital currencies. And yeah, so the reason that's Nick thinks of that as synthetic time is that think about it this way. It's a protocol for a group of people to be able to generate a reliable order of events, basically, in a way that's totally autonomous and refers only to itself, basically, and doesn't have any trusted third party to kind of verify it or enforce it. And so that, I think, is roughly what Nick means by synthetic time. Although I'm sure that one could probably give a much better and deeper kind of philosophical explication of what synthetic time means, specifically with reference to the Kantian philosophy and, what using the term synthetic, for instance, giving that its full kind of Kantian flavor and implications. I'm sure I'm sure Nick is probably going to do that in part. That will be one of the tasks of the rest of the book. But I'm just giving you my kind of very generic, simple intuitions about what these things basically mean, as far as I can tell so far. So yeah. What else? Was there anything else in terms of my early impressions? I think for a late night informal discussion of my inchoate impressions, I think that will do. I think I should wrap it up. Justin, when will Bitcoin reach 20K? I have no clue. I don't know anything about things like that. So, yeah. I think I'm going to now go eat a pizza. Thanks for hanging out, everyone. Thanks for your contributions to the chat, especially Crypt and those of you who kind of chimed in with some technical contributions. Thank you for that. It's fun to have some interaction. I hope this was somewhat interesting or useful to someone out there. As I said, it's a very complicated book. I'm still trying to figure it out, and we only have some early tea leaves. So I'm definitely going to be reading it. I definitely encourage you to read it if you're interested in this stuff. And I'll definitely I will very likely do more streams like this. Maybe if I get a better grasp on what Nick is doing, and once I finally really understand it, maybe I will do something more sophisticated. Maybe something more focused, like that's more a little bit more polished and efficient and compressed. But until then, I might do a few more of these kind of personal, fleeting impressions. Thanks for the kind words, Crypt, Brantley, G4 Ron, appreciate it. So what else? Do I have any other news? I've talked with Reza Negarestani. He is going to be joining me on the live stream soon. We're discussing when it's going to work for him, but he's confirmed he's happy to do it, so that will be good. Stay tuned for Reza. I saw that Reza and Nick Land actually had some interesting debates today on the nature of intelligence, so that should be interesting. And yeah, so this is my second live stream this week, and I haven't had any guests this week. I'm in a little bit of a lull period with respect to guests, but I'm keeping on the live streaming. The reason I'm in a lull is because I'm right now actually doing a major push to email people, and so we're gonna have a badass schedule of a lot of cool people, I think, over the next 6 months or so. I'll keep you posted on who will be coming on when I know, but yeah, it's a lot of work to basically send out emails because I don't want to spam people. I want to be authentic and direct with people, straightforward with people. I don't want to just like write form emails and then send them to a million people. That would be much more efficient. But every time I invite someone, I send them a personal email, and so it just takes a lot of time. I don't mind doing it. It's good, but it's like I have to take a little bit of a break from doing live streams with people to write them. But what I need to do and will do is just get on a more regular schedule with emailing people, like send out, a handful of emails every week or something like that, and just get into a routine of doing that. But it's one of the many things I'm kind of currently working on working on standardizing, kind of working on all my workflows for how I do these different types of internet things. Oh, by the way, I also cleaned up my whole website. I did a kind of web design overhaul, just made it much cleaner and added some bells and whistles while also kind of simplifying it. So pretty happy with that. It's mostly done. I still have some tweaks I need to do, but yeah, that's been good. That's actually why I haven't posted a new blog post this week. But yeah, I'm getting all these things standardized. And actually next week will be the first seminar that I do. I'm really excited about that. We have a private seminar going on for patrons that it'll be a small group of 5. I think I have one group of 5 so far who have signed on to do private seminars, and we have our first one scheduled for next week. So I'll let you know how that goes. I'm personally curious to see. It's just like an experiment. So who knows? Maybe I really don't know what to expect. We're going to kind of create the thing as we go, but that'll start next week. So I'll keep you posted on how that goes and where it goes in the future. Someone's saying in the chat that I should get a xenofeminism person on. That's a really good idea. I would be happy to have a xenofeminism person on. I did meet a few weeks ago. I met Helen Hester at an event in Southampton. I don't know if she would remember me, but I'm sure I could email her. She might be game. It's difficult, because I don't know nowadays, like, since I've kind of like, how should I put it? I've personally kind of just like stopped paying attention to academic norms of respectability, and I've kind of put my blinders up to academic standards and academic social circles in the interest of doing whatever I want on the internet and writing what I want and talking with whoever I want. I've purposely tried to kind of like forget and lose contact with like other people's standards really, in academia especially. And so, oh, my wife is awake now. She probably thinks I'm crazy, but she understands. And yeah, so where I was going with that is that I've kind of lost my sense of like what people consider acceptable. And for instance, like, do the xenofeminist academics, like, do they think that what my live stream is like evil? Because I've talked to Nick Land. Like, I don't know. Like, if I asked Helen Hester, I don't know if she would maybe say no or maybe ignore the email, because maybe, like, is my live stream now seen as like persona non grata? I genuinely don't know. I mean, obviously I don't care, but I'm just saying it's a difficult puzzle for like inviting people, because, you know, if people think they're like too pure for my little operation, that's fine, but I'd like to save my time in not asking them. But then on the other hand, you know, I often find that people are actually not quite as timid as you might think, and people are usually quite, you know, I'm often surprised how willing people are. I'm also going to try to get Mackenzie Wark, for instance. Like, someone suggested Wark, and Wark liked the tweet. Like, someone tweeted at me, "You should get Mackenzie Wark," and Wark liked the tweet. So, is that an indication that Wark would like to? We'll find out. I have to email them, and we'll see. But yeah, I have this like big long list of people I'm emailing, and I'm confident that the next 6 months, expect some really good live stream conversations and podcasts and all that. And yeah, folks, it's now officially 4:46 a.m. in the UK. The sun is probably almost coming up, and I think I need to go eat. I still have to eat dinner. My schedule is so fucked up. But as always, thanks for hanging out, folks. I'll be in touch with you. Oh, by the way, if you want to get into the Discord server, as always, you know the drill. Just shoot me a DM on Twitter, and I'll hook you up with the Discord server if you want to. Thanks, everyone. I'll keep you posted on upcoming news. See you later, everyone.